Hello and welcome to Penmanship, a podcast about Australian writing culture. I'm your host, Andrew McMillen. Today's guest in episode 27 is Cory Taylor. In May 2016, she published a book named Dying, a Memoir. As the title suggests, it will be her last public writing, for Cory is dying of melanoma-related brain cancer. Structured around 3 essays, Cory writes of how her body has failed her since the initial diagnosis in 2005, just before her 50th birthday. While her once full life has since contracted to just 2 rooms, her bedroom and her living room, where she spends most of her days now, her mind remains sharp and active, and in the book she describes the arc of her narrative with vivid detail. She writes, "When you're dying, even your unhappiest memories can induce a sort of fondness, as if delight is not confined to the good times, but is woven through your days like a skein of gold thread." At once sad and proud, her writing in these pages is truly masterly. Readers of any age will find much to learn here, and it is difficult to imagine a finer note on which to close. Cory and I live on the same street in inner-city Brisbane, Montague Road in West End, and I met her for the first time on a rainy Wednesday morning in mid-June. She was propped up on the daybed in her living room, and in between occasional interruptions from friends and carers, Cory kindly allowed me to ask her a few questions about her life as a writer. There's a bit of ambient noise in the background of the recording as traffic rushes past on the wet street outside, but the living room itself is a wonderful sanctuary of art and literature, and despite the fact that her body is wasting away, Cory's love for words and language burns brightly. Our conversation touches on how she decided to write about her impending death, the hardest parts of writing about dying, her early experiences working as a freelance screenwriter in the 1980s, how her PhD research into the internment of Japanese immigrants during the Second World War led to her second novel, and what she aimed to achieve by writing her final book. Introducing Cory Taylor, author and screenwriter. Cory Taylor, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me. Where are we? Describe the room where we are right now.
We're sitting in my living room in Montague Road, West End, full of the clutter that we've accumulated over a long life.
Yes, indeed. Downstairs is a gallery owned by your husband, Shin.
Yeah.
You've been here since when?
We've been in the house for 6 years, 6 or 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
The gallery only opened just before Christmas last year.
Mm-hmm. Very good. What are your days like, Cory, at the moment?
Very sedentary. I move from my bed to my sofa, and that's about where I stay for the rest of the day.
You hold court here.
I hold court here.
I finished your book last night. I loved it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I want to talk about it a lot because I'm sad, maybe ashamed to say that it's the only writing of yours that I know.
Yeah.
And I came to you through our mutual friend, Ben Law. Where did this book come from?
It came from a number of triggers. I obviously knew I was mortally ill. Probably the reality struck about halfway through last year, and didn't really know how to write about it. Wanted to write about it, but didn't know how. Didn't want to write a sort of maudlin cancer blog about my battle with cancer and that horrible cliche. And Andrew Denton started his campaign to change the laws around assisted dying, and I heard of that and was immediately behind that, notion, and had been thinking about that for a while anyway. And then my editor at Text called me, and we were just chatting about Andrew's campaign, and turns out he is on the board of Text.
Oh, right.
And so the editor at Text, we were chatting really for half an hour on the phone, and she finally said, look, why aren't you writing all this stuff down, all this stuff that we're discussing? And I thought, it's a good question. And she actually started talking about her experience of death with her parents and what have you. And it struck me that people really do want to talk about this a lot. She wasn't the only person that opened up about things that she hadn't really told anybody. And, I had found that would happen a lot, that people would, once you were open to the conversation, they would really want to talk. So I got off the phone and thought, why aren't I writing about this? It's terribly important to people. It's important to me,
yes.
And obviously people want to hear it. So literally the next day started the book.
Oh.
And I probably aimed for a 10,000 word essay initially and thought that would be it.
Knock, it's Anne.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah.
Had you written about dying until that point?
No.
Not at all?
No.
Not even
tried.
in your private journals or anything like that?
Oh yeah, I tried privately too, but not successfully.
Why not?
It's very hard to write about. It's because I think you fall into all sorts of traps about this is your own personal experience of illness, and I didn't really want to write about illness. I didn't, because I don't want to read about illness. It's the last thing I want to read about, really.
Yeah.
So you have to discover a new way of shaping their story, making it live on the page. Strange pun. But yeah, it has to. I think it has to work as writing before it works as a sort of death story.
Had you read much about death or dying-related works?
I'd collected a few books that I thought did it quite well. Not many, I have to say.
Do you recall those off the top of your head?
There's one by Brodkey, the American writer who found out he was dying of AIDS quite late in life. And but actually the best one I've read is, since I've published my book, is The Violet Hour. I don't know if you've read it.
No.
Which is a fantastic collection of studies of famous writers mainly, but Sigmund Freud, Susan Sontag, Dylan Thomas, John Updike, and what they were like in their final hours, and how they dealt with their own deaths. Fascinating, beautifully written book. And I thought that was a very astute way of talking about death, is to find out as much as you could about other people's dying, and very well documented deaths, because the book involves lots of interviews with the friends and family of those people who saw it from their perspective, and also from the dying person's perspective. So that's been a revelation, and I wish I'd discovered it earlier. I enjoyed, I can't remember his name, it's an Indian writer, Anil Gawande, I think his name is.
Gawande, yeah.
Yeah, Gawande.
Atul Gawande.
Yeah, which I thought was beautifully done.
Being Mortal, is that the one?
Being Mortal,
yeah.
But that was by a doctor, and I think we hear too much from doctors, actually. I think the patients are more interesting in a way. But you don't hear a lot from the patients, because they're not fit enough to write the books.
That's right.
Yeah.
You were kind of a rare case in that sense.
I was so lucky to have the time to actually sit down and do it.
Yeah, I mean, you write about that in the book. You say one of the advantages of dying in the way that you are is that you have plenty of time to think about it and talk
It's
about
true.
it and
And
write
you're
about
very
it in your
focused.
case. Where did you write most of the book?
Here.
Right here. Yeah.
Yeah.
You had that 10,000 word essay in mind.
Because I thought that was about the length I could manage. And
Oh, yeah.
then I got to the end of the first 10,000 words and I'd written things that surprised me, which led into the family story, which is a big part of the book too. And that led me into the next 10,000 words and then into the last 10,000 words. So it sort of ended up book size, which is good. Yeah.
What's the word count on it?
It's pretty low. It's probably 60,000 maybe?
60,000.
60,000 maybe?
Yeah, right.
So 30, 30, 30.
Uh-huh.
Does that add up? No, that's 90.
20,
isn't it?
20, 20.
No. 60,000.
Yeah, right. It's an interesting structure.
Yeah.
I really like the way you've done it.
I think that's actually an unacknowledged influence from Julian Barnes. Have you read, talk about great books about death. He wrote a book called Levels of Life, which is the most elegant story purporting to be about hot air ballooning, and then ends up to be a story of the loss of his wife. His wife died quite suddenly, and they were just, this lifelong soulmate couple. And it was a deep, deep shock to him. So the last section is about his grief. It's just beautiful. And he used a sort of 3-part structure for his book, which I think was underlying my notion of how I could shape this book into sort of 3-part. It also, I think, comes from writing screenplays for as long as I did, that you sort of naturally fall into a 3-act structure.
Yeah.
Kind of works.
Yeah.
And also brevity, screenplays are quite short, so I'm always comfortable with short stuff.
How did the editing process go? Did you
Amazing.
decide just on that structure yourself, and it kind of flowed quite easily from there?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
But Penny Houston is my editor at Text, and she's just extraordinary. So she tidies up all my dreadful punctuation and completely incompetent. She's just so astute about how sentences should work. So it's always a joy to work with her.
Did she prod you to dive deeper in some parts or take some things out?
Yeah.
Which as a good editor does, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she was always right. It's annoying.
Yeah. You tell me about Susan Addison. This comes up quite early in the book.
Yeah.
Who was Susan Addison?
Well, Karuna, which is the nursing service that's looking after me, has what they call a biography service, where they train people to go out and talk to patients just in a conversational way. And the biographers record the conversation, and then they go home and transcribe it. And then they ask you to select photographs if you want. And then the whole thing is compiled and bound and then given to the family. And I struck gold with Susan because she was also a writer and a great reader. And so we, had lots in common. But the most brilliant thing about meeting her was that she, as I say in the book, had lost a son, and then in quick succession had lost various other family members, but the loss of her son had obviously been the most tragic, event in her life. And she had dealt with a lot of loss after that, losing other family members as well. So she was kind of a veteran of this whole dying thing.
Whereas you were quite
I
new
was
to
a
it.
novice, yeah.
Yes.
So she became my mentor in many ways, which was a gift. And then all of a sudden, she didn't turn up one Wednesday, and a phone call came from Karuna that she'd had a massive stroke and was in hospital and unlikely to recover. And I just went, what? She was supposed to be recording my life for posterity, and now she's gone, just so suddenly. And then it strikes you, well, it can happen to anybody, anytime. It's completely unpredictable, random event.
Do you have the writing that she produced from your time?
I have got the biography that we produced, yeah.
What's that process like? Because you're a writer yourself, and I
Yeah.
imagine you kind of are used to telling the story your own way.
That's right. And it was far too loose for my taste. It really was a chat.
Yeah.
But it was good because she prodded me to answer questions that I wasn't expecting, and I think that really encouraged me in the writing of my book to probe certain things that we'd sort of touched on in our conversations, but I hadn't really gone into in much depth. So it was good for that, opening up areas. Yeah.
You only had her for 3 months.
3 months. Yeah.
And then she's gone. That's it.
She was just gone. Yeah.
Did that teach you anything in particular, other than
Just
how quickly
how
it can go?
random, how random it can be, and unfair, and in contrast to what we were saying before, I had all the time in the world. I still have time to talk to people and prepare them. She had no time at all to
That's
prepare the
right.
families, and of course left them devastated.
Yeah, all the things you never got to say or tell someone.
Yeah. So her husband has come subsequently to visit, but he's not in a good place.
You were interviewed for ABC TV, a show called You Can't Ask That, at some stage. Tell me a little about that. Why do they want to talk to you?
Well, they had this notion, which I thought was terrific, of opening up taboo subjects. So they thought that terminal illness was quite a taboo topic. People who'd been in prison, that was a taboo topic. People with issues around sexual identity. I can't remember what the other groups were. And then they invited questions from all over the country, and then they selected the most common questions that people wanted to ask members of these groups. And so I was part of the terminally ill group, and the setup was you didn't know what the questions were beforehand. So you were in the studio recording, and the question would be on a card turned upside down on the table. You'd pick up the card, read out the question, and then spontaneously answer it. And I think there were about 10 questions, and they weren't all that surprising, but they did throw up all the things that I'd sort of been thinking about anyway. So they forced you to articulate things that you probably wouldn't have bothered to articulate before. And it was encouraging in the sense that people really wanted to know these things and knew the answers.
Yeah. And that structure gave you a nice way into the book as well.
It did.
You could deal with them one by one.
It did, yeah.
Really well done.
And they're the sort of questions that you don't reach the end of, really. You can keep thinking about them forever.
Yeah. Has that screened, that TV show?
Not yet. It seems to be lost in a bit of a limbo between whether it's going to be just ABC iView online or whether it's going to be ABC One. They've expressed some interest in running it on ABC One. So I suspect that's what's happened, and it's been pushed back to probably not till November on ABC One. I suspect that's what happened, but I haven't really heard.
I look forward to seeing you.
Yeah. Apparently it went very well. They were pleased with the results, so it's good.
Do you think you're good at spontaneous verbal answers, or are you more of a writer? You like to sit back and think and revise?
Well, they said I was good. I have to take their word for it.
Yes, indeed. You wrote in the book, you're never happier than when you're writing or thinking about life as a writer and observing the world as a writer. Where did that begin for you? You write quite beautifully about your early awakening around language and the importance of words. Tell me a bit about how that transpired for you.
Vivid memories of being 15 and in a poetry class with my English teacher, who was a poet himself, is still a poet, and those moments when, if you're lucky, you're captivated by something that just hits you, and you think, I could spend my whole life thinking about that thing. And for me it was language, and also I suppose the life of poets. They were quite glamorous people, Sylvia Plath and Robert Lowell and all those poor benighted drunks. And my teacher was quite glamorous in his way. So there was a tremendous allure about the writing life, I guess, as well as the words. And you start writing schoolgirl poetry or schoolboy poetry, thinking that this might be something you could aspire to. And then you pretty soon realise there's no living to be had. But the allure never left. So I spent lots of years scribbling bad poetry.
You wrote, as a child, writing seemed like the most important thing in the world to practice and master. I totally understand. This is why we're here talking now.
That's right.
This podcast is all about people who work with words for a living.
Yeah.
I, since a very young age, have been fascinated by words and language. So, just the way that you put all that down in text really resonated strongly with me. I've never seen anyone capture it so well. Was writing appreciated in your family? Was reading appreciated in your family?
Yeah, definitely. I write in the book about my grandmother, who was a bush poet from Longreach, and used to send poems away to Sydney to be published in the Bulletin and similar publications. And then when she was widowed eventually, she decided to move to Sydney to be part of that literary scene in Sydney. I think she lasted 2 weeks, and she went to sleep one day and never woke up.
Yeah.
And that was the sort of family legend of what happens when you choose the literary life.
A cautionary tale.
And my mother wrote a lot, scribbled a lot. So my brother became a journalist. So it was definitely part of the family legend, I guess you could say. My uncle was the editor of the Longreach. My mother's uncle was the editor of the Longreach Leader. So it was always respected, this profession. But I eventually ended up segueing into screenwriting, because at that point, when I was thinking, I'd finished university, what was the next step? The film industry was blossoming, so it occurred to me that you could actually make a living writing scripts for film and TV.
How did you pursue that? What was your pathway? I
did a year at the Film and Television School in Sydney in 1980. And then I worked as a freelance screenwriter in Sydney, which was quite lucrative for a while because there was a lot of tax money. There was a tax break on film development. So there was quite a lot of money pouring into it. So you could get paid quite well to develop scripts.
Would you submit scripts on spec?
Initially, yeah, and then got commissions. And
what was a script worth if it was bought roughly back then?
You wouldn't get the script bought. You'd get a gig writing the first draft or the second draft or whatever. And draft by draft, I think the first draft was probably worth $20,000. It was real money.
Yeah.
And the only problem with it was that you'd work tremendously hard and long on projects that would never get financed and then would just disappear. So it becomes pretty unsatisfying in that way after time.
What were you writing about? What kind of scripts were you writing?
Basically, I'm sure you've heard the expression that every writer has only one story. Basically, the drama of my family life and my parents' terrible marriage and, coming of age stories, which was rehearsal for what I eventually wrote about when I started writing fiction. And I was very influenced by 1970s BBC television drama, because the BBC had this Wednesday night playhouse, which was big name writers, Harold Pinter and people like that, John Osborne, writing sort of kitchen sink English drama, but very high class. And the ABC, for brief periods, did the same thing. They instigated a sort of one night a week playhouse. You'd call it a telemovie now, just a one-off thing. So I did a couple of those, and they did quite well. But it never lasted long at the ABC. They didn't continue with that format. And there was much more money to be made with serials, and if I'd had my head screwed on, I would have been writing for Number 96 and the Sullivans and stuff like that.
Pitching to shows that already existed.
Serial television,
Yeah.
But I was a bit snobbish about that kind of TV.
What was the community around you like at that time? Were there many freelance screenwriters?
There were a few, yeah.
Were you friendly with them, or were they adversarial?
There's always an edge of competitiveness, yeah. Who's making more money and getting more jobs. The real money was to be made in those sorts of long-running serial TV shows. But I didn't really have any talent for that, I didn't think. I was much more about self-expression in TV, which wasn't very fashionable at all.
Sounds like you learned a lot during that time, though.
I did, yeah. I mean, it's a great training for writing. It's very disciplined script writing, because everything you write converts to money. It costs money. I remember writing a steam train into one of my film scripts at one point, and that was immediately crossed out. There's another $150,000 in the budget at least.
Yeah. Yes?
Yeah. Sorry, Andrew.
No problem.
You're
making time for me. Don't apologise. I really appreciate it.
Where were we about writing for TV?
Screenwriting.
Yeah, it's a good discipline, because you can't waste time or money. So you learn how to be very dense. And one of the golden rules about screenwriting is you get into a scene at the latest possible moment and get out of it at the earliest possible moment.
Really? Explain that further, please. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, which is very good advice.
Tell me more about that.
So no waffle.
Get into a scene as late as possible.
So you get in at the latest possible moment, and you get out at the earliest possible moment.
Right. That's really good advice.
Yeah.
I've never heard that, but
yeah.
I'm going to keep that one.
And then I think central to writing of all kinds is suspense, which is to do with that. That you've always got the reader or the audience in a state of tense suspension, where they're just thinking, what the hell's going to happen next? What's going to happen next?
Mystery is central to screenwriting, right? Central to a lot of writing, but especially on the screen, where
and suspense, that desire to know what's going to happen next, and not knowing. So I think suspense and surprise are the two things that you learn to value. And surprise is so rare now, we just all see so much stuff, we just think, well, I saw that coming. Don't you?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So it's very easy to say, very hard to do.
What was your discipline like at that time? Were you spending 9 to 5 at the typewriter or the computer? Or?
My discipline's never been very good. I always found the sort of 3 or 4 hours in the morning were the most useful, productive time. So 10 till 2, my limit.
And if you got some good work done then, you'd think it was a successful day?
Yeah.
And happy to clock off?
Yep. Or a word count. You think, well, I'm going to do 500 today, and that's it. But I'm very admiring of people who can get up at 5 in the morning, before their kids get up, and do their 4 hours then. Never been like that. Any excuse to not work.
Procrastination. Yeah. Doing the dishes, cleaning up the house.
Anything at all.
Yep. I get it. What was the transition from screenwriting to what came next for you?
Children's writing, actually, because I had an agent in Sydney, and I'd left Sydney by then. I'd initially gone to Japan, then she and I got married. We left Sydney and moved to the Gold Coast, which is a complete revelation. And I was writing scripts about the Gold Coast because there was a lot of material there. And then by chance a friend of mine ran into my ex-agent in Sydney, and she said, "How's Cory doing?" And my friend said, "She's fine. She's thinking of getting back to writing." And my younger son had just started school by then. And my ex-agent said, "Well, tell her the only people in Australia who make any money are children's writers." And that's still probably true. There's 5 or 6 very successful kids' book writers who just do make a lot of money because their books get into all the school libraries and guaranteed sale.
Yeah.
And because I had young kids then, I was keyed into kids' books anyway. So I sat down and wrote a few children's titles and managed to sell those. And that was fun. And then my editor left the company, and that always changes things. So the sequels to my books, I wasn't able to sell them. So that kind of was a short career. And then kept writing scripts and firing them off to producers in Sydney. But, you have to be in Sydney really to maintain all those networks and contacts. So, really I was doing it for my own, to keep my hand in. And I enjoyed doing it, so I kept going. Then I was watching a football game, my kids' football game, one day, and a friend of mine, another mother, was sitting next to me, asked me what I was up to, and I told her. And she said, "Oh, you should apply for a scholarship to do a PhD." I said, "What on earth would I do a PhD in?" She said, "Film and television, of course." And she had done the same at QT. Come in. So I investigated QT because I'd never heard of the creative industries, section of the university, and applied for a scholarship, and lo and behold got one, which was so surprising to me. And enrolled in a PhD at QT, and it was a practice-led thing. So the deal was to write 2 feature screenplays and an exegesis, and that was great. I really enjoyed it. That's where I met Benjamin.
Oh, I was going to ask that. Yeah. So what year would that have been, roughly? Mid 2000s, early 2000s?
Yeah, I would have been there, early 2000. He was there at the same time.
Yeah.
And so the screenplays were to do with, the whole project was to do with the representation of Japanese in Australian cinema. And there'd been a few films. Japanese Story was one of them. There'd been an ABC TV series about Changi. So there was quite a lot of material to look at. And it involved a lot of research into the similar experience in America. There was a lot of scholarship about representation of Japanese Americans in American movies and TV. So it was a really interesting area to be looking at, and made me think a lot about the kinds of stuff that I was writing, because when we were in the Gold Coast there was a big immigration to the Gold Coast from Japan. So a lot of the stuff I was writing about was Japanese living on the Gold Coast and purportedly living the Australian dream, more or less successfully. So the whole area interested me a lot. And then I was also interested in the history of the Japanese in Australia, which is a pretty untold story, and the kind of major untold story there was about the internment of the Japanese during the war. And I had a good friend who's an historian who had spent her whole academic life researching this topic. So it struck me as a fabulous story for fiction. And my second novel ended up being about that. That was My Beautiful Enemy.
Right.
Yeah, so that's based on all of that research about that internment during World War II.
Where in Australia were they interned?
They were scattered all over, but the camp that I was interested in was the family camp, which was near Shepparton in Victoria.
Right.
And that's where they locked up the families of Japanese, so they could have been anybody. And it struck me that it could have been me. You know, the police could have arrived at our door and taken me and the kids and Shin, because we would have qualified as not enemy aliens, but associated with enemy aliens.
Right.
So it was kind of, I had a visceral connection with the story.
So that research led you directly into
It
fiction?
did, yeah.
That's awesome.
It's because it is an amazing story. And it does raise all sorts of issues around Australian history and how we've written our history, and all the racial underpinnings of our identity. Yeah.
At QUT, did you take energy or inspiration from being around young and aspiring writers in that program?
Yeah, actually. Ben in particular, of course, because he's such a live one.
What were your first impressions of him?
Oh, I thought he was fantastic, because he was the first. He was such a contrast to me at the same stage that he was at. You know, he was so driven, and he knew what he wanted, and I'd never really been sure, you know, what I wanted or how I could fit what I wanted in with what was out there. But he seemed to have an intuitive grasp of how you shape a career and, you know, do the things you want to do.
Yeah.
Which has proven to be the case with him. So yeah, that was terrific. But the film industry itself hadn't changed much, so I wasn't inspired in that sense. And the kinds of stories that I wanted to tell were beyond the reach of, you know, producers or production companies here. It wasn't the sort of thing they were interested in. Because I don't know what the fashion is now, but the film business was going through a fashion then of wanting genre pictures. You know, horror movies, and I think this is still the case in the world.
Which did not interest you?
Horror films, no. I wouldn't know how to even begin.
Yeah.
Although I think some of them are pretty successful. The Babadook, have you seen The Babadook?
I have not. I've heard it's excellent. I don't
It's
like
really good.
horror films personally.
Yeah,
so
it's
I've kind
not
of
your
avoided
average horror
that reason.
film. It's very clever.
Yeah, right.
But no, I think if you're going to write genre pictures, you need to know absolutely everything there is to know about genre, and be very, very sure of what you're doing and how you're going to go about doing it.
Yeah, you write in Dying, it might sound odd for a writer with my small output to claim that work has been a lifelong preoccupation, but it's true. When I wasn't actually writing, I was preparing to write, rehearsing ideas, reading, observing life and character, learning from other writers. And what you're telling me here is totally true. Like, all the screenwriting stuff, all the scripts that you wrote that maybe got picked up but never made. Like, you've written a lot. It's just if you were to put it all into...
Yeah. Drawers full of it.
Bottom drawers or top drawers?
Bottom drawers.
You write, there's this one sentence towards the end that really struck me, which is, for what are we, this is in Dying, for what are we if not a body taking your mind for a walk just to see what's there? And I thought that's so true. Like,
Yeah.
we do all these things, we pursue our interests and what we think is our purpose, writing in both of our cases, but really we're just walking around trying to make sense of the world.
Exactly.
Trying to find surprise and suspense and mystery and all those things we just discussed before.
Yeah.
That was really well put.
And then, of course, your body betrays you and you think, oh, no more walking around.
Yeah, and there's a part you talk about, you used to go for a walk down to the river with Shin, or ride your bike around, or you drive, things that you can't do, and it's hard not to feel envious of others who can still do that.
Yeah, you can still do those simple things.
What's it like to be so sharp mentally, but your body has betrayed, if that's the right word?
It is betrayal, yeah. It's extremely weird. There's just no words to describe it, which is why at the end of the book I say I've reached the end of words, reached the edge of words. It's just so bizarre. It's like you're being invaded by this alien who's determined to do away with you. There's nothing you can do. Nothing you can do. No mental gymnastics can get you through.
And you wrote that you had, I'm sure everyone in your situation does have those moments of why me, and it's so unfair. And but where does that get you? That kind
Nowhere. Why not me is the question.
The ending, which you just mentioned, we don't have to go into specifics if you don't want to if you don't want to spoil it.
No, go ahead.
The last paragraph, which begins, "I've come to the edge of words now." Did that come to you intuitively? Did you try a few different endings before you came to that one in particular?
Not really.
Do you want to describe the ending?
Hey?
Do you want to describe that ending, that last paragraph? Or maybe would you like to read it? I'll hand you the book. Let me see. Here you are.
I've come to the edge of words now, to the place where they falter and strain in the face of dying's terrifying finality. The reason I was always such a fan of film is that films are about showing, not telling. If I were writing my death scene for a film, my very last moments would go something like this: a montage, shaky, overexposed home movie footage of a girl with a dog in dappled sunshine, a car speeding down a dusty road, the same girl on a beach with palm trees, arm in arm with her mother in some outback moonscape, crossing the tarmac at an airport with a silver jet in the background. The jet takes off. A kookaburra sits on a branch laughing. A skink slinks away under cover. Fade to black.
So beautiful. What did you feel when writing that paragraph? Did it feel like the only way to end it?
Pretty much. Squaring the circle, isn't it?
Yes, yes. And knowing what I now know about your history with screenwriting, the fact that you prefer to writing in images rather than words makes a lot of sense.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's the other thing it does teach you. It's all about showing.
At what point did you show Shin or your children the text?
I showed them a first draft, which they all read, and I think found very sad to read, and I think it sort of brought it home to them that it was real, because it can be very surreal, the whole business, and you can talk about it as much as you like, but it doesn't really hit home. My sister said the same thing. She has known I've been dying for a long time, but she said, "Oh God, when I read it on the page, I thought, this is real, this is actually happening." So I think it hit them quite hard.
Did you take any notes or feedback or criticism from what you wrote in that first draft?
I did, actually, yeah. because in the first draft I was a bit more harsh about certain people in the book, and then I realised that I couldn't go out on that note. You know, if those are your last words, you have to be quite careful. So I did pull back a bit. A bit of maliciousness left.
Yeah, you write quite harshly about some aspects of your family, your parents, your siblings. Have you had feedback from your family since the book has been published?
Thankfully, they've all, from unexpected family members, have all reinforced the truth of what I said. And actually then they've told me stories that are far worse than the ones that I wrote. So it's been a bit of catharsis for some of them, I think.
What did you want to achieve with Dying, the memoir?
Well, I think I said it in the book that writing is about shaping unbearable things and making them bearable. So basically it was a selfish motive in one sense. But and I think that shaping has helped other people. The responses I've got to the book have been largely, thank you so much for writing about this and helping us to have these conversations. And I've spoken to my mother about dying as a result of reading your book and things like that. So hopefully I've achieved that purpose too, that it's not just about making it bearable for me, but it makes it bearable for others, strangers, to start having these talks.
Yeah, certainly will. It's one of the best books I've read.
Oh,
to
Andrew,
be honest.
thank you.
So well done. And I don't know you until this moment. I've never met you. I know of you through a mutual friend, and plenty of other people who have read it and will read it don't know you, but it will help because you've put something into words that is quite hard to talk about, to think about, to capture. So it's masterful.
Thank you.
Are you proud of what you've done with this book?
Thank you so much.
Has it done what you hoped it would do? Is it everything?
I think so.
Yeah.
And I just feel so lucky that I had the time to do it and the energy at that time to pull it through, pull it off.
Anything else you want to say before we finish it?
Not really. Just been a pleasure to talk to you. Yes.
And you. Thanks for making the time.
No problem.
Thanks for listening to Penmanship, and thank you immensely to my guest, Cory Taylor, for taking the time to allow me to speak with her at home. You can find show notes to this episode at penmanshippodcast.com, where you can also see a photograph that Shin, her husband, took while I interviewed Cory. If you enjoyed this podcast, there are several ways you can support it. You can leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or wherever you happen to be listening to this podcast. You can share it with people in your life who love reading and talking about great Australian writing. You can find the show on Twitter at PenmanshipAU and on Facebook. If you have feedback, I would love to hear from you. Andrew at penmanshippodcast.com is my email address. The theme song is Eternally Yours by Laughing Clowns. That's it for now. Until next time.